1. Short summary: Marcus, an orderly, dependable cybersecurity specialist, is broken up with via a theatrical PowerPoint by his girlfriend Vanessa, who wants to just be friends, while continuing to enjoy his home and benefits. He accepts the new friendship, but establishes strict boundaries. Vanessa repeatedly tests those boundaries, crashing events and demanding perks. Her behavior escalates into harassment when Marcus dates her former best friend Chloe. Vanessa's refusal to take financial responsibility leads to a rapid social and economic downfall, eviction, exploitative arrangements, public exposure, and Marcus moves on with Chloe, forming a mature, reciprocal relationship built on mutual respect and fiscal responsibility. 2. Narrative structure: beginning, conflict, climax, end. Beginning: Marcus's stable, predictable life is described and contrasted with Vanessa's flamboyant, spendthrift personality. They live together. He subsidizes her. Conflict: Vanessa presents a friendship PowerPoint to break up while remaining financially comfortable. Marcus sets new boundaries. Vanessa refuses them, intrudes at social gatherings, and becomes manipulative. Climax: public humiliation at Marcus's barbecue and Vanessa's obsessive harassment when Marcus starts dating Chloe. The pressure culminates in Vanessa's meltdown and social/financial collapse. End: Vanessa is financially and reputationally diminished. Marcus and Chloe build a healthy partnership based on responsibility and mutual respect. 3. Emotional hooks and impactful moments: the PowerPoint breakup. Unique, cinematic, instantly memorable. They friends, test, Netflix password, spare key, crash at barbecue, relatable boundary clashes. Dylan's blunt interventions and the public showdown at the barbecue, satisfying social vindication. Chloe's arrival as a contrast to Vanessa, nurturing, responsible. The date where she pays her share, emotional payoff. Vanessa's rapid fall and desperate midnight plea, schadenfreude mixed with pity. 4. Elements that make the story go viral or relatable: PowerPoint / let's be friends breakup is a shareable, meme-ready trope. Clear moral framing: freeloading partner versus boundary-setting protags. Easy for audiences to pick a side. Social media drama subplot: Instagram posts, followers dropping, taps into familiar online behavior. Mix of humor, public humiliation, and redemption. Ideal for short reels or talk videos. Strong, crisp scenes, breakup scene, barbecue confrontation that edit well into short-form content. 5. Weak points: cliches, repetition, lack of depth. Vanessa can read as one note: manipulative, spendthrift, shallow, without much nuance or inner life. Heavy exposition: long stretches recounting events rather than showing them visually. Predictable downfall: supportive guy dumps freeloading ex, meets better woman, arc risks cliche. Several scenes repeat the same dynamic: Vanessa asking for favors, which reduces escalation variety. Little introspection from Marcus about why he tolerated it earlier. Less inner conflict than external action. 6. Suggestions for improvement: tone, structure, character work, etc. Show, don't tell. Open with a striking cinematic beat, PowerPoint moment, rather than long backstory. Use visual details to show Vanessa's behavior. Add nuance to Vanessa. Give a line or microflash revealing insecurity or pressure that complicates audience judgment. Humanize her fall to create moral ambiguity. Deeper Marcus interior. Brief scenes of self-doubt. Why he subsidized her. Fear of confrontation, so his final firmness feels earned. Vary the escalation. Introduce different boundary violations: financial, social, emotional, and one surprising twist: Vanessa uses a manipulative legal threat or public smear to raise stakes. Tighten length. Cut some sequences and focus on 4 to 6 cinematic beats. PowerPoint breakup, boundary tests, barbecue, showdown, Chloe connection / date, harassment, crescendo, Vanessa's fall, and Marcus' new life. Shift perspective in one scene. Briefly inhabit Vanessa's point of view for a moment to complicate emotional response. 7. Ideal target audience: millennials and Gen Z who consume relationship content, reels, and breakup stories. Viewers who like character-driven social dramas with moral clarity and viral moments. TikTok/Instagram audience. Fans of short films exploring boundaries, social media culture, and contemporary dating dynamics. Beginning, Marcus's thumbs paused over the last slide, as if that tiny digital gesture could stop the moment. The projector's glow painted the dining room like a confession booth. The rest of the house was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge and the tick of the second hand. Vanessa's cursor hovered over a bullet point, evolving into friends, mutual benefits, and she smiled like she'd rehearsed the expression until it looked effortless. He should have been able to laugh. He didn't. Instead, Marcus watched the woman who'd once fallen asleep mid-episode on his shoulder sit bolt upright, as if the rehearsal had become a ritual. Behind her practiced enthusiasm, a stray curl of hair caught the light, the same stray curl that used to fall over her eyes when she was genuinely amused. Tonight, it stayed stubbornly still. Marcus kept his hands folded, palms flat against his knees. In his mind, he ran a checklist: keys, mortgage autopay, firewall updates. The numbers were comforting. A life built from spreadsheets, plum-colored post-its, and tidy calendars. He did not live theatrically. He lived defensively, patching vulnerabilities, closing gaps. An invulnerability in the digital world had taught him the value of boundaries in the human one. He had told himself, once, that love is the exception. He'd been wrong. Vanessa clicked to the slide titled, Why? Personal Growth. Her voice was even, warmed with that marketing cadency she used at work. We've plateaued, Marcus. We're comfortable. Comfortable is, she searched for the word, stagnant. I want to be more. The camera of the living room, a little mockery of his career, caught the screen, and the way her eyes were a touch too bright. She was pitching a future that she imagined in filters and champagne flutes. Marcus tried to trace where the tenderness went. The shape of their life had become logarithmic, slow, predictable. She wanted geometric leaps. When she said, simply, let's just be friends, the syllables landed with the same dull weight as metrics on a board. Precise, incontrovertible. Vanessa's hands moved like a conductor's. She had prepared charts. She had categorized emotions. It was businesslike and somehow obscene. She wanted the couch, the backyard for her photos, the password to his streaming, the habit of him showing up, and none of the cost. Marcus pictured the same living room, weeks earlier, where they'd shared garlic bread and an argument about nothing. He remembered dim weekday mornings, her hair in a messy bun as she scrolled through job listings she never applied to. He remembered the months of subsidized brunches, the quiet accounting of bills he kept to himself. He had loved her. He had believed generosity could be private and still pure. Friends, he echoed, slow, tasting the word as if it might be a bargain. He had been trained to analyze patterns until a solution revealed itself. There was a vulnerability here that data couldn't fix, the human expectation that closeness confers access. He chose his reply like a sysadmin locking a server after a breach. Final, necessary, unromantic. Fine, he said. If we're friends, then let's actually be friends. The corner of Vanessa's smile faltered, briefly, like a glitch. The light from the projector made her pupils dark and hollow. Marcus looked at her hands as she reached for the next slide, fingers trembling an almost imperceptible degree. The script she'd written had assumed compliance. It had not accounted for a character rewriting the terms. Outside, the street was the same as always, lamplights and the distant swoosh of a late delivery. Inside, the air changed. 2 years of habit shifted in a single click, and Marcus felt, for the first time in a long time, the clean certainty of a locked door. He would test the boundaries he'd drawn. He would be kind, but he would be clear. There was a small, rising thrill in that clarity, like the moment you finally patch a vulnerability and watch the exploit logs fall to zero. It promised a future less theatrical and far more intact. Section 2. Build up the morning after the presentation. Vanessa left a mug on the counter with lipstick at the rim and a sticky note. We'll figure out the rent, okay? Friends help. He stared at it for a long time, tracing the loop of the K as if cursive held answers. Marcus was not unsympathetic. He'd, once, convinced himself that patience was love's highest currency. But patience without reciprocity calcified into enablement. She moved out within a week, slowly. Boxes appeared at odd hours. The spare key found its way into a drawer she claimed she never used. He reset passwords and changed autopays, small ritual armor that felt, at first, like petty revenge and then like responsible grown-up hygiene. She texted in bursts, sudden emergencies about groceries he'd never rationed, then longer messages about finding herself. He answered with clear, calibrated replies, polite, practical, and non-negotiable. Boundaries, he discovered, were like firewalls. Once configured, they kept out the noise. But Vanessa did not gracefully adopt the role of neighbor. Requests arrived as if default settings had not been changed. Netflix password? Borrowed car? Could you pick up the coffee brand I like? Each ask was a probe, a test packet aimed at different ports: convenience, affection, entitlement. Marcus said no. Not because he enjoyed the denial, but because every yes eroded the architecture he was reconstructing. He watched the probes escalate. The spare key, once relinquished in theatrical drama, appeared again in the lock at Barbecue Saturday. Marcus was setting up the smoker, smoke curls wrapping around his worn hands like a ritual he'd perfected. Dylan arrived with his paramedic bluntness and a six-pack, and the backyard thrummed with co-workers, chatter offloading into the late afternoon. Vanessa breezed across the yard, wine bottle in hand, as if she had always been part of the guest list. For a moment, Marcus braced for public awkwardness. He'd rehearsed every response. Dylan's laugh cut through the small panic, an announcement of allyship. Did he invite you? Dylan asked, tone flat. Vanessa's composure cracked like ice. We're friends, she flounced. Friends don't need invites. That sentence hung there, awkward and exposed. Marcus felt the relief of an answer matched to a question. No, friends call. Friends don't commandeer social calendars. The circle of co-workers shifted, the air bending toward discomfort. He could have forced a smile and folded back into old scripts. Instead, he let the boundary breathe. He said, calmly, that in his house, invitations mattered. It landed with a weight that made the yard collectively inhale. The scene rippled through his life like an update that reached every dependent system. Word spread. Sympathy and curiosity came in equal measure. Some colleagues admired his steadiness. Others whispered that he could be petty. Social currency traded in snapshots and gossip. Meanwhile, Chloe, Vanessa's former best friend and the one who would change his rhythm, stepped into the frame. Chloe arrived at his door one rain-slick Wednesday in scrubs and exhaustion. She smelled of hospital corridors and citrus hand sanitizer. Earthy, immediate. She carried none of Vanessa's theatricality. When she sat down, she spoke in sentences that didn't need performance. She told stories about vulnerability and overtime and real deadlines where saving a life mattered more than an Instagram aesthetic. Marcus listened, and something in him loosened. Conversation that did not calculate return on investment, but simply met. She was not immune to the drama. She offered him context, sometimes cruel in her candor. She never paid rent on time here, Chloe said, sliding a coffee toward him. She posted brunch shots while not affording the bills. But this was not scorn. It was reportage from someone done with excuses. Marcus realized that in Chloe's honesty there was a kind of kindness. She didn't romanticize the past. She examined it. He found himself drawn not to the pity, but to the sturdiness of someone who kept her own lights on. Their first real moment together was ordinary. Pizza, split bill, laughter that did not hinge on status. She paid before he could protest, and the gesture landed like an optic that focused everything. Around them, Vanessa's probes continued, messages, barbed posts about toxic men, thinly veiled boasts. But in the quiet between Marcus and Chloe's shared meal, the world felt quieter, as if a load had shifted off his shoulders. Marcus's choices hardened like well-tempered steel. He would be brave, and he would be kind. He would not rescue someone who refused to learn. Each small refusal bought him a little dignity back. The more transactional the requests, the clearer the lesson. You either meet the terms of mutuality or you accept the consequences. The building tension now had a cadence. Vanessa testing, Marcus refusing, Chloe grounding, like a three-note motif repeating and deepening. Section 3. Midpoint twist. The day Marcus and Chloe made it official. An ordinary Friday. Candlelight leaning off cheap wine. Nothing dramatic happened. They kissed like two people who had waited for permission from themselves rather than the world. It was quiet, uncomplicated. That small domesticity, the simple symmetry of shared dishes and mutual laughter, became the fulcrum that tipped everything. Within a week, Vanessa's reactions graduated from petulant to tactical. Texts multiplied into voicemails. ranging from pleading to accusatory, each one a different currency of manipulation. Marcus, mindful of his work with systems, watched the pattern emerge. When access is closed, attempts to force entry become louder and more creative. A new number would appear, a masked caller, a friend of a friend with second-hand outrage. The harassment was erratic and surgical, aimed at destabilizing his routine. He ignored the first round of calls. He put voicemail on. He compartmentalized. Then the midpoint came, unexpected, public, irreversible. Marcus's quarterly team barbecue was not a showpiece. It was a labor of love ritual for colleagues who spent long nights debugging threats. He prepared smoked brisket and set speakers for chilled background music. The backyard hummed. Laughs. The hiss of the smoker, bottles clinking. Mid-conversation, Vanessa appeared. She walked in like weather. Uninvited, unannounced, wine bottle like a talisman. She slid her phone into the speaker and overrode the playlist. Her voice, bright and practiced, announced to strangers that she and Marcus were just friends now. A ripple of awkwardness ran through the crowd. Marcus saw the color leave faces. Colleagues exchanged looks that translated to "Did you know?" He felt suddenly exposed, like a system called into a conference for a breach investigation. Dylan's approach was quiet and efficient, paramedic straight talk that cut through performative entitlement. "Were you invited?" he asked, and the yard tuned in. Vanessa's reply, slick, entitled, fell flat. Marcus noticed her hesitation, the rehearsed confidence unspooling. In that crack, the audience found permission to judge. Vanessa tried to take control of the party, redirect conversations, perform as hostess, claim ownership of the music and the jokes. In the end, she was ejected politely but firmly, her parting words sharp. "When you grow up and learn to treat people decently, we'll see about the friendship." She left in a storm of slammed gates and sudden drama. The silence that followed was the sick kind that clears a room of pretense. Colleagues returned to the food as if the episode were an unwelcome advertisement, the mirth resuming like a system reboot. The publicness of her intrusion shifted the stakes. Marcus, who had sought to be firm and humane, found himself squarely in the crosshairs of a woman whose access to social capital had been weaponized. Her social feed became a running commentary, passive-aggressive quotes about toxic men and stage sunsets. Doctrine turned to performance. What had been a private reconfiguration of intimacy had become a broadcast spectacle. The twist was not merely that Vanessa escalated. It was that she weaponized shame. Friends received messages. Colleagues were pulled into the orbit, and an attempt to rewrite the terms of engagement turned into a campaign to undermine Marcus's reputation. For a cybersecurity specialist, reputation is as important as code integrity. He felt an old defensive reflex rise. Map the threat, isolate channels, preserve logs. He documented messages, screenshots, timestamps, digital breadcrumbs that might matter later. But the real surprise came from an unexpected ally, Chloe. Instead of retreating from the chaos, she stood beside him, quiet, unflashy, resolute. When Vanessa targeted her directly with manipulative accusations, claiming collusion, romantic treachery, Chloe responded not with drama, but with facts and boundaries. She refused to be gaslit. Her calm was a new variable in the system that destabilized Vanessa's narrative. At the midpoint, the story turned from private boundary setting to public conflict. Marcus had thought he could contain the drama with polite refusals and clear rules. Instead, a social contagion spread. The threat was no longer just emotional. It had become reputational and logistical. Vanessa had crossed into behaviors that risked real harm: stalking, repeated contact, and public smears. The rules had changed. Marcus realized he couldn't simply hold the line alone. He needed allies, procedures, and the kind of clarity that comes from a shared, sober perspective. Section 4. Build TO Climax. Vanessa's posts began to adopt a new tone, less performative, more accusatory. She painted a narrative where Marcus was controlling, stingy, and unfeeling. Mutual friends texted with equivocal sympathies. Marcus watched, mostly silent. He had never wanted spectacle. He wanted clarity. But as the pressure increased, practical problems multiplied. Random numbers calling, unexpectedly appearing at the gym, a barrage of messages to friends and employers. Dylan insisted that a pattern of harassment required escalation. Document everything. he said, and stop responding. Marcus set his phone to Do Not Disturb and channeled that anxiety into methodical action, archived the messages, screenshot the posts, label timestamps. In his line of work, evidence was a kind of armor. He began to imagine the legal perimeter that might become necessary. Chloe's presence provided something else, not evidence, but a homeostasis. She helped him see the pattern without personalizing it. She's not grieving what you lost, Chloe said quietly as they rinsed dishes together one late night. She's grieving control. Her practicality cut through the emotional fog. She accompanied him to file a report with the police when Vanessa's in-person intrusions crossed a line, showing up at the gym and insisting there was a family emergency. The officers listened with the tired patience of people who'd seen many such dramas. Marcus filed a complaint. The process felt both humiliating and relieving. The social strain invaded his workspace. A smear post that misrepresented a private conversation made it into the hands of an acquaintance who worked at a client company. Marcus handled the fallout professionally. Clear, concise emails that clarified misinformation and redirected attention back to deliverables. His boss acknowledged his poise. But the stress seeped elsewhere, into small fractures, restless sleep, constant check of the front door, and unsettled vigilance that felt like a light left on in a window. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life began to show the consequences of living outside her means. Her Instagram, once glossy, flickered with anxiety. She floated between brief bursts of curated glamour and quiet, private pleas for help that contradicted the image. The more she lashed out, the more her safety nets frayed. Chloe, previously a rescuer who had initially sheltered Vanessa, gave up her patience after months of unpaid rent and broken promises. She locked her own door to preserve her household and sanity. Word reached Marcus through small channels: eviction notices, canceled plans, and shuttered profiles. Vanessa's downward spiral accelerated in a way that made the public schadenfreude complicated. He found himself watching her self-destruction with a mixture of vindication and unease. It was not enjoyment, but a recognition that actions yield consequences. Even so, morality in the theater of humiliation is messy. Marcus had no joy in losses that left a person exposed and vulnerable. Chloe, steady as a compass, suggested practical steps: change locks, set emergency contact protocols, schedule regular check-ins with friends. They planned, together, and that planning felt like armor. Marcus learned how to lean without relinquishing his independence. They built small rituals, shared grocery lists, split bills, weekend walks, each a brick in a new architecture of partnership. The contrast between the two women's approaches was stark. One demanded, the other contributed. Then came the second escalation, a legal threat connected to Vanessa's arrangement with an older man she'd briefly seen, an NDA and hush money rumor that suggested an unraveling that might cost her more than pride. Dylan called with the news, half incredulous. The idea that vanity and shortcuts could spawn legal consequences made the situation feel like a cautionary tale. Marcus avoided gloating. He felt a complicated hush in his chest, relief, yes, and sadness that someone he had once loved had not learned to protect herself. The next weeks were a tense lull, Vanessa's interventions growing less vicious as exhaustion replaced venom. But it was the quiet that unnerved him. People capable of creating theater can vanish into silence that hides more than it reveals. As the story built toward a climax, lines were being drawn. Marcus would not be the passive resource anymore. Chloe would not be anyone's second act. Vanessa's collapse had become a social event that exposed the costs of entitlement. The wave that had started small now gathered momentum. The inevitable confrontation with consequences inches closer. Section 5. Climax. The call came just after midnight. Marcus was asleep beside Chloe when his phone lit the room. He squinted at the screen. Vanessa. He should have let it ring. Instead, habit, perhaps compassion, made him answer. Her voice was stripped of performance, raw and small. Marcus, please, she pleaded. I need help. I'm drowning. For a moment, the old reflex stirred. The desire to fix, to patch, to be the person who makes things right. He felt it pull like an old magnet. Then he remembered the months of entitlement masked as requests, the Netflix passwords, the spare key invasions, the slow bleed of his savings into her lifestyle. At this, his voice was calm but unassailable. I'm not lending you money, he said. The sentence landed like a sealed file. There was a long silence where she tried different tones, sob, plea, fury, each a different access attempt. She swung from self-pity to accusation, then to bargaining. Friends help each other, she said, the line she always returned to. Marcus listened, then did the thing he had been preparing himself to do. He told the truth as he saw it. He spoke of respect and reciprocity, of the erosion that came with taking and never giving. He refused to be reabsorbed into the pattern. Her reaction was feral, anger that claimed she was victim, manipulative, and finally enraged. She promised to drag his reputation through the mud. He recorded the call in his mind as a string of attempts to coerce. The threat vacillated between the irrational and the legalistic. Exposure, lies, revenge. Marcus did not hang up. Instead, he gathered evidence, text threads, voicemail timetables, photographs, witness accounts. He documented the weaponization of intimacy. When Vanessa followed through with a barrage of calls, messages, and public posts that attempted to corner him socially, Marcus took one more step. He sent a terse message to mutual friends. I am not discussing this in public. Please respect our privacy. He reached out to his manager and explained the situation in plain terms, offering context and evidence to defuse any professional risk. The combination of calm transparency and collected documentation stripped the wind from Vanessa's sails. In a culture that treats performance as currency, Marcus chose the antiseptic clarity of records. Vanessa's desperation worsened. Legal threats, a $4,100 settlement rumor, a hush-money story that seemed to collapse inward. But the climax was not a single scene of dramatic revenge. It was the cumulative effect of choices, his refusal to subsidize, her continued escalation, the public unraveling of a curated life. The high point arrived when the facade finally cracked in public. In a small, unremarkable venue, she was confronted by the reality she'd long tried to avoid: eviction notices, unpaid cards, and a friend who had the receipts. It was not satisfying in a cheering sense. Marcus felt a hollow victory. Watching someone fall is complex. Justice is not always joy. But in that quiet aftermath, he felt a line drawn. He had chosen boundaries over enablement, and the consequences, personal, social, were inevitable. He had also gained something: clarity about what partnership could mean when built on mutual respect, accountability, and contribution. Chloe's hand squeezed his in the dim aftermath, neither triumphant nor smug. You did the right thing, she said, not as a verdict, but as a recognition. He had preserved himself and, perhaps, offered a painful lesson. People can't outsource growth. The climax burned the old architecture away, leaving a grate where pretense once warmed them. The heat was raw, but in the embers, something honest could begin. Section 6. Ending months later, the house felt different, quieter in the best way. The spare key hung on a hook by the pantry, a small, mundane sentinel of a boundary kept. Marcus and Chloe had moved in together with a practical grace, a sharing spreadsheet, a shared calendar, a simple rule about dishes. They planned trips between paychecks and debated whether to upgrade the mattress. Love had become a careful ledger of give and take, not a performance. Vanessa's social feed had gone dark for stretches, then returned with stoic, spare posts. No glamour shots, only thin motivational captions. Gossip whispered that she'd gone back home for a while, that the hush money had been paid, that a period of rearrangement had begun. Marcus felt no gloating in the updates. He felt, at most, a tempered pity, an awareness that someone he'd once cared for had been ill-prepared for adult life. Her collapse had a teachable edge that was cruel in its bluntness. He and Chloe rented a small storage unit together to keep the things they weren't ready to sort through: boxes of books, extra plates, a smoker Marcus insisted on keeping because it made him happy. In the afternoons, they planned meals and talked about the years ahead in practical terms: emergency funds, a retirement account, a trip to Oaxaca. Their intimacy was anchored in shared responsibility. It felt both humbling and luxurious. One late afternoon, as they filed paperwork for a joint savings account at a modest bank, Marcus felt a rusty fear he hadn't expected, the old reflex to fix, to shoulder, to rescue. Chloe noticed it in him and met it gently. We're partners, she said, fingers on his wrist. But partnership doesn't mean losing yourself. She had her own accounts, her own plans. Compromise, she taught him, was not surrender. It was the deliberate weaving of two independent lives. He thought about the PowerPoint again, once, like a lesson in poor design. That night had been cruelly theatrical, but it had forced a reckoning. It had revealed what he would and would not be in a relationship. In the aftermath, he had learned to respect himself enough to refuse enabling habits and to welcome someone who added rather than consumed. On a quiet Sunday, Vanessa's mother appeared briefly at a community meeting Marcus attended with Chloe, an awkward greeting, a waved excuse of a conversation. No drama. She mentioned, in a voice laced with fatigue and resignation, that her daughter had moved and was trying to rebuild. Marcus listened. "I hope she learns," the woman said softly. Marcus felt something more than vindication, compassion for the hard education life delivers when crutches are taken away. He had not wished this for Vanessa, but he would not step back into the same pattern. Time softened the edges. Mutual friends found a rhythm. Some reconciled, some stayed distant. Vanessa's reputation was not erased, but neither was it carved in stone. People change or don't. That was the stubborn truth. Marcus had stopped waiting for someone else to change him. He built instead a life with Chloe that was small in its daily rituals, but large in its trust. In the final scene, they stood at the edge of the backyard smoker, Marcus flipping slow-smoked ribs, Chloe stirring a salad. The sun fell in a slow ribbon. No projector glow, no dramatic slides. Only the ordinary choreography of two people cooking in sync. Marcus reached for Chloe's hand without announcing it. She slipped her fingers into his and leaned her head on his shoulder. There was no grand pronouncement, only the gentle proof of partnership in the quiet of shared tasks. Vanessa existed then as a memory of a turning point, a cautionary tale that had pushed him into adulthood's steadier light. Marcus had learned to balance generosity with boundaries and to love someone who loved themselves. The story closed not with triumphal fireworks, but with the steady warmth of a kitchen light left on, illumination enough.